When 19-year-old Marco Petroni crashed into Lewis Hamilton at 200 meters, destroying the champion's car in a ball of flames, the world expected anger. Instead, they got the most beautiful moment in racing history, a 30-second embrace that would be seen by 500 million people and change lives around the globe. But the real story behind that internet-breaking hug began 5 years earlier, with a dying boy's promise and 3 simple words that would transform 2 enemies into brothers. The Belgian Grand Prix at Spa-Francorchamps always felt like magic to Lewis Hamilton. The long, twisting track through the Ardennes forest reminded him why he fell in love with racing. Today, the sun was shining bright over the famous circuit. Perfect weather for what could be his greatest comeback. Lewis gripped the steering wheel of his silver Mercedes. Lap 32 of 44. He was leading by 8 seconds. Behind him, the other Formula One cars looked like colorful toys in his mirrors. His heart was beating fast, but not from fear, from pure joy. "Great job, Lewis!" His race engineer Bono's voice crackled through the radio. "Keep this pace, and the win is yours." Lewis smiled inside his helmet. At 39 years old, many people said he was too old to win races. They said younger drivers were faster. They said his time was over. But here he was, leading the Belgian Grand Prix like the champion he had always been. The crowd in the grandstands was on their feet. British flags waved everywhere. Even the Belgian fans were cheering for him. Lewis could feel their energy as he flew past at 200 miles per hour. As he approached the famous Eau Rouge corner, Lewis thought about his father, Anthony. Dad had worked 3 jobs when Lewis was a kid. He cleaned offices at night, worked in a factory during the day, and fixed cars on weekends. All so Lewis could go kart racing. "One day, son," his father used to say, "you'll race at the biggest tracks in the world, and I'll be there cheering for you." His father was here today, somewhere in the crowd. Lewis had bought him the best seats money could buy. The Eau Rouge corner was coming up fast. It was the most dangerous part of the track. Cars went uphill at incredible speed, then turned sharply to the left. Many drivers had crashed here over the years, but Lewis had driven through Eau Rouge thousands of times. He knew exactly what to do. Behind him, young Marco Petroni was driving his Alpine racing car. Marco was only 19 years old, the youngest driver. In Formula One, he had been struggling all season. This was only his 15th race ever. Marco was frustrated. He was running in 8th place, far behind the leaders. His team boss had been yelling at him all week. "You're too slow," he had said. "We didn't hire you to finish last." Marco wanted to prove everyone wrong. He wanted to show he belonged in Formula One. As he saw Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes ahead of him, an idea formed in his mind. A dangerous idea. "I can catch him," Marco whispered to himself. "I can pass the great Lewis Hamilton." Lewis was concentrating on his line through Eau Rouge. The corner required perfect timing. Too fast, and you'd crash into the barriers. Too slow, and other drivers would pass you. In his mirrors, Lewis saw the blue Alpine getting closer. Marco was driving much faster than was safe. Lewis frowned. The young driver was being reckless. "Careful, Marco," Lewis said quietly. Even though Marco couldn't hear him, but Marco wasn't being careful. He was desperate. This might be his only chance to pass a 7-time world champion. He pressed his foot harder on the gas pedal. The gap between the 2 cars shrank. 50 meters, 30 meters, 20 meters. Lewis entered the Eau Rouge corner at exactly the right speed. His car danced through the turn like it was on rails. perfect technique, years of experience showing. Marco was going too fast, way too fast. But he didn't slow down. Instead, he tried to pass Lewis on the inside of the corner. It was a move that only worked in video games. In real life, it was suicide. The two cars touched. It happened in less than a second, but to Lewis, it felt like slow motion. Marco's front wheel hit the side of Lewis's car. Both cars started spinning out of control. Lewis felt his Mercedes leave the ground. The car flew through the air like a silver missile. The crowd gasped. Time seemed to stop. "No, no, no!" Lewis shouted. His car hit the steel barriers at nearly 200 miles per hour. The impact was enormous. The sound echoed through the forest like thunder. Pieces of carbon fiber flew everywhere. The car bounced off the barriers and slid across the track upside down. Lewis was trapped inside, hanging from his safety belts. His head was spinning. He could taste blood in his mouth. Worst of all, he could smell smoke. The car was starting to catch fire. "Get out! Get out now!" his brain screamed at him. But Lewis couldn't move. His body wasn't listening to his commands. The crash had shaken him badly. The flames were getting bigger. In those terrifying seconds, Lewis's life flashed before his eyes. He remembered being 7 years old at his first go-kart race. His tiny hands could barely reach the steering wheel. His father had painted the number 44 on the side of the cart. "Why, 44, Dad?" little Lewis had asked. "Because that's going to be your lucky number," Anthony had replied with a big smile. Lewis remembered his first win at Rye House karting track. He was so small, he needed a cushion to see over the steering wheel. But when he crossed the finish line first, he felt like the king of the world. He remembered his mother Carmen cheering from the fence. She was always there, rain or shine. Even when she was tired from working all day, she never missed a race. "I'm so proud of you, Lewis," she would say, hugging him tight after every race. The flames were getting closer to Lewis's helmet now. The heat was incredible. He could hear the crowd screaming. He could hear the rescue workers running toward his car. "Come on, Lewis," he told himself. "Don't give up now." With every bit of strength he had left, Lewis reached for his seatbelt buckle. His hands were shaking, but he managed to unlock it. He fell toward the roof of the upside-down car. The rescue workers arrived just in time. They pulled Lewis out of the burning Mercedes with seconds to spare. As they carried him to safety, Lewis looked back at his destroyed car. Flames were shooting 10 feet into the air. His chance at an 8th World Championship was literally going up in smoke. The crowd at Spa-Francorchamps had gone completely silent. 60,000 people held their breath as Lewis was loaded into an ambulance. Camera crews from around the world filmed every second. In the medical center, Lewis sat on a bed with a few cuts and bruises. He was lucky to be alive. The doctors said he would be fine in a few days, but his heart felt broken. On the TV screen, in the medical center, they were showing replays of the crash over and over again. Lewis watched Marco Petroni's Alpine hit his Mercedes. He watched his car fly through the air and explode into flames. But what Lewis saw next made him forget about his own pain. On the screen, Marco Petroni was still sitting in his damaged Alpine on the side of the track. The young Italian driver had his helmet off, and he was crying. Not just a few tears. He was sobbing like a little child. Marco's shoulders were shaking. His hands covered his face. He looked completely heartbroken. As Lewis watched the young driver cry, something stirred in his memory. Something from long, long ago. A promise he had made to someone very special. Someone who wasn't here anymore. But what was that promise? And why did seeing Marco cry make Louis remember it so clearly? Louis closed his eyes and tried to remember. The answer was there, somewhere in his heart, but he couldn't quite reach it yet. All he knew was that this crash, this moment, was about to change everything, not just for him, but for Marco Petroni too. The hug that would break the internet was still to come. But it all started here, with a crash, some flames, and a young driver's tears. Marco Petroni couldn't stop crying. He sat in his damaged Alpine, racing car on the side of the track, watching Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes burn in the distance. The flames reached high into the Belgian sky like angry orange fingers. "What have I done?" Marco whispered to himself in Italian. "What have I done?" His hands were shaking as he pulled off his racing gloves. The crowd was booing him now. 60,000 people were angry at the young Italian driver who had just crashed their hero. Marco came from a tiny village called Maranello in Italy. Most people knew Maranello because Ferrari's factory was there. The red cars were built just down the road from where Marco grew up. But Marco's family had nothing to do with the famous car company. His father, Giuseppe, had been a mechanic, not for Ferrari, but for a small racing team that barely had enough money to buy tires. Giuseppe dreamed of working in Formula One someday. He spent every free moment learning about racing cars and engines. One day, Marco, Giuseppe used to say, while fixing old cars in their tiny garage, "One day, I'll work for a real racing team, and maybe you'll be the driver." But Giuseppe never got his chance. When Marco was 12 years old, his father died in a car accident. Not a racing accident, just a regular car accident on a rainy Tuesday morning. Giuseppe was driving to work when another car ran a red light. Marco's world fell apart that day. His mother, Sophia, was left alone with no money and a son who only cared about racing. She took a job cleaning offices at night. While other kids slept, Sophia scrubbed floors and emptied trash cans so Marco could keep karting. "Your papa wanted you to race," she would tell Marco when he felt guilty about the money. "He would be proud to see you drive." Marco was good at karting, really good. By the time he was 14, he was winning races all over Italy. His dream was to meet Lewis Hamilton, the greatest Formula One driver in the world. That dream came true at a karting event in Monza in 2021. Marco was 15 years old and had just won the Italian Junior Championship. After the race, someone tapped him on the shoulder. Marco turned around and gasped. Lewis Hamilton was standing right behind him, smiling. "Great driving today," Lewis said in perfect Italian. He had learned the language because he loved Italy so much. Marco couldn't speak. His hero was talking to him. Lewis Hamilton, the man who had won 7 world championships, was congratulating little Marco Petroni from Maranello. "What's your name?" Lewis asked kindly. Marco," the boy stammered. "Marco Petroni." "Well, Marco Petroni, you've got real talent. Keep working hard, and maybe I'll see you in Formula One someday." Lewis noticed Marco's helmet was old and scratched. It wasn't like the fancy helmets the other kids had. Marco's mother couldn't afford a new one. "Can I sign your helmet?" Lewis asked. Marco nodded so hard his neck hurt. Lewis took a black marker and wrote something on the side of Marco's white helmet. Then he handed it back with another smile. "Remember what I wrote," Lewis said. "It's important." After Lewis walked away, Marco looked at his helmet. The words were written in Lewis's neat handwriting. "Dream big, race clean, forgive quickly." LH, Marco, didn't understand what forgive quickly meant back then. He was just a kid who wanted to drive fast cars. But he never forgot those words. 3 years later, Marco made it to Formula One. It was like a fairy tale. The little boy from Maranello was now racing against his hero Lewis Hamilton every 2 weeks. But Formula One was much harder than Marco expected. The cars were incredibly fast and difficult to control. The other drivers had years of experience. Marco was making mistakes every race. His team boss, Otmar Szafnauer, was losing patience. "You're supposed to be a racing driver, not a traffic." "Cone!" Otmar shouted after Marco spun off the track in Monaco. The newspapers were mean too. They called Marco the mistake from Maranello and the boy who doesn't belong. Every crash, every error, every bad day was on the front page. Marco's confidence was disappearing. Each race felt harder than the last. He started making more mistakes because he was trying too hard to prove himself. The night before the Belgian Grand Prix, Marco called his mother Sophia. She was still cleaning offices, still working nights to support herself. "Mama, maybe I should quit," Marco said quietly. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong here." "Marco Antonio Petroni," his mother said sternly. She only used his full name when she was serious. "Your papa didn't dream of Formula One so you could give up. And Lewis Hamilton didn't sign your helmet so you could quit." Marco looked at his helmet sitting on the hotel room desk. The words Lewis had written were still there, a little faded, but still readable. "Dream big, race clean, forgive quickly. LH, I know, Mama," Marco sighed. "But what if I never get better? What if I keep making mistakes?" "Then you learn from them," Sophia said. "That's what your papa would say. He always said, mistakes are just lessons in disguise." The next day at Spa, Marco felt pressure like never before. He needed a good result. His Formula One career depended on it. When he saw Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes ahead of him, flying through the corners like a silver bullet, Marco made a decision. He was going to pass Lewis Hamilton. The same Lewis Hamilton who had signed his helmet and believed in him. Marco was going to show the world he belonged in Formula One. But instead of a brilliant overtake, Marco made the biggest mistake of his life. The move that sent Lewis's car flying into the barriers. The move that could have killed his childhood hero. Now, sitting in his damaged car, Marco felt like his world was ending. The crowd was still booing. The TV cameras were filming his tears. Tomorrow, every newspaper would have pictures of him crying. His phone was already buzzing with angry messages from people around the world. Social media was exploding with hate. People were calling him terrible names. They were saying he should never drive again. Marco slowly climbed out of his Alpine. His legs felt weak. A track marshal helped him walk to the medical center to get checked by the doctors. As he walked past the grandstands, the booing got louder. Someone threw a plastic bottle at him. Security guards had to protect him from angry fans. In the medical center, Marco sat alone on a bed. The doctors said he was fine physically, but emotionally, he felt destroyed. On the TV, they were showing replays of the crash over and over. Each time, it looked worse. Marco watched his car hit Lewis's Mercedes. He watched Lewis's car fly through the air like a silver rocket. "He could have died," Marco whispered to himself. "I could have killed Lewis Hamilton." A nurse came over and turned off the TV. "Don't watch that," she said kindly. "It will only make you feel worse." But Marco couldn't stop thinking about it. He pulled out his phone and went to Instagram. His last post had been a photo of him smiling before the race. Now it had thousands of comments, and they were all angry. "You don't deserve to be in F1. Go home to Italy. You almost killed a legend. Worst driver ever." Marco deleted the app and put his phone away, but the words were burned into his memory. That night, Back in his hotel room, Marco stared at his racing helmet, the same helmet Lewis Hamilton had signed 4 years ago. The words seemed different now. Dream big, race clean, forgive quickly. LH. Forgive quickly, Marco read aloud. But who's going to forgive me? He picked up the helmet and held it close to his chest. It was the only connection he had left to the kind Lewis Hamilton he had met as a boy. The Lewis Hamilton who had believed in him. Tomorrow, Marco would have to face the world. He would have to read more angry comments and see more hate. His Formula One dream was probably over, but tonight he just held his helmet and cried for the hero he might have lost forever. Outside, his hotel window, the lights of Spa-Francorchamps were still on. Somewhere in the darkness, Lewis Hamilton was probably lying in bed, thinking about what had happened. Marco wondered if Lewis hated him now. He wondered if they would ever speak again. He wondered if he had destroyed any chance of forgiveness, with one terrible mistake. What Marco didn't know was that Lewis Hamilton was indeed thinking about him, but not with anger or hate. Lewis was remembering something from long ago, something about a promise he had made to a very special boy. A promise that would change everything. The hate started before Marco even woke up the next morning. While he slept in his hotel room in Belgium, the internet was exploding with anger. Videos of the crash had been watched millions of times. Photos of Marco crying in his car were everywhere. Marco's phone buzzed all night with notifications. When he finally picked it up at 7 a.m., he had over 10,000 new messages. His hands shook as he read them. You should never drive again. Go back to Italy, where you belong. Lewis could have died because of you. Worst rookie in F1 history. The messages kept coming. Some were even worse. People were threatening to hurt him. They said terrible things about his family. Marco felt sick to his stomach. He turned on the TV news. Every channel was talking about the crash. The reporter, on Sky Sports, was shaking her head sadly. This was a completely unnecessary move by Marco Petroni, she said. The young Italian driver showed zero respect for a 7-time world champion. Many people are calling for him to be banned from Formula One. Marco switched channels. The news was the same everywhere. Even in Italy, his own country, people were angry with him. Petroni has embarrassed all of Italy, said a reporter from Rome. He is not ready for Formula One. He should go back to karting where he belongs. Marco's mother Sofia called him from Maranello. She was crying. Marco, they're saying terrible things about you on the internet, she sobbed. I can't read the newspapers anymore. It hurts too much. I'm so sorry, Mama, Marco said quietly. I've ruined everything. No, my son, you made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. But these people, they have no hearts. But Sofia was wrong about one thing. Not everyone was being mean to Marco. A few people on social media were trying to defend him. They said he was just a young driver learning. They said everyone deserved a second chance. But these kind voices were drowned out by the ocean of hate. By noon, protesters had gathered outside the Alpine Formula One factory in England. They held signs that said, "Fire Petroni now," and "Justice for Lewis." Some fans had driven hundreds of miles just to demand that Marco be kicked off the team. The team boss, Otmar Szafnauer, was getting phone calls from angry sponsors. Companies that paid millions of dollars to put their logos on Marco's car were threatening to pull out. We can't be associated with a driver who nearly killed Lewis Hamilton, one sponsor said. Our customers are furious. Marco's teammate, Pierre Gasly, tried to be supportive. But even Pierre seemed different now. He was polite, but distant. In the team meeting, Pierre sat on the other side of the room. "Look, Marco," Pierre said carefully, "we all make mistakes. But you need to be more careful. The team is under a lot of pressure right now." Marco nodded, but he felt completely alone. Even his own teammate was being careful around him. The worst part was that Lewis Hamilton hadn't said anything. Not one word. No interviews. No social media posts. Nothing. The Haiti silence was scary. Usually, when there was a big crash, drivers would talk about it. They would say, "Glad everyone is okay," or "Racing is dangerous, but we accept the risks." But Lewis was completely quiet. Marco checked Lewis's Instagram account 50 times a day. Nothing. His Twitter account was empty too. It was like Lewis had disappeared from the world. "Why isn't he saying anything?" Marco asked his mother during another phone call. "Maybe he's very angry," Sophia said sadly. "Maybe he's too angry to speak." The newspaper headlines got worse every day. "The boy who killed a legend's dream." Petroni, the most hated man in F1. Lewis's title hopes destroyed by rookie mistake. Marco stopped reading them, but people would show him the headlines anyway. Fans would hold up newspapers when he walked past. They wanted to make sure he saw how much they hated him. His appetite disappeared. Food tasted like cardboard. He lost 10 pounds in a week. His mother begged him to eat something, anything. "You're getting too skinny," she worried. "You need to stay strong." But Marco didn't feel strong. He felt like the weakest person in the world. Sleep was impossible too. Every time Marco closed his eyes, he saw Lewis's Mercedes flying through the air. He heard the sound of metal hitting metal. He smelled the smoke from the burning car. He would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding. Sometimes he would cry until the sun came up. The hate mail kept coming. Thousands of letters arrived at the Alpine factory. Some had pictures of the crash with angry words written on them. Others had threats. The team had to hire extra security to protect Marco. "Maybe I should just quit," Marco told his mother one night. "Maybe everyone would be happier if I just went home." "No," Sophia said firmly. "Your papa didn't dream of Formula One so you could give up after one mistake. And Lewis Hamilton didn't sign your helmet so you could quit when things got hard." Marco looked at his helmet again. The words Lewis had written were still there. "Dream big, race clean, forgive quickly, LH. But Mama, what if Lewis never forgives me? What if he hates me forever?" "Then you'll have to live with that," Sophia said. "But you can't control what other people think. You can only control what you do next." The hardest part was seeing Lewis's fans. They were everywhere Marco went. At the airport, at restaurants, even at the grocery store. They would recognize him and start booing. "You almost killed our hero," one fan yelled at him in a coffee shop. "Lewis would have won the championship if not for you," another one screamed. Marco started wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap everywhere. He tried to hide, but people still recognized him. The hate followed him like a dark cloud. 2 weeks after the crash, Marco was walking through the paddock at the next race in Hungary. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, was wearing a Lewis Hamilton t-shirt. When she saw Marco, she started crying. "You hurt Lewis," she sobbed to her father. Why did he hurt Lewis? The father picked up his daughter and glared at Marco. "Stay away from us," he said coldly. That night, Marco sat alone in his hotel room. He had never felt so lonely in his entire life. He picked up his phone to call his mother, but then he stopped. He didn't want to make her cry again. Instead, he stared at his racing helmet. The helmet Lewis Hamilton had signed when Marco was just a 15-year-old boy with big dreams. "Forgive quickly," Marco read aloud. But how can anyone forgive this? Thought about quitting again. He could go home to Maranello. He could get a normal job. Maybe work at a gas station or a restaurant. Anything would be better than this hate. But something stopped him. Maybe it was his father's memory. Maybe it was his mother's sacrifices. Or maybe it was the kind words Lewis had written on his helmet. "I won't give up," Marco whispered to himself. Not yet. He didn't know that somewhere else in Hungary, Lewis Hamilton was sitting in his own hotel room, thinking about Marco, too. But Lewis wasn't thinking about hate or anger. Lewis was thinking about a promise he had made 5 years ago. A promise to a very special boy who had taught him something important about forgiveness. The world wanted Lewis to be angry. They wanted him to demand that Marco be banned from Formula One. They wanted him to say that Marco was a dangerous driver who didn't belong. But Lewis Hamilton was planning something completely different. Something that would shock the world and change everything. The question was, what was he planning to do? 5 years earlier, October 2019, Lewis Hamilton walked through the Children's Hospital in Milan, Italy. The white hallways smelled like cleaning, supplies, and medicine. Nurses in colorful uniforms smiled at him as he passed. They all knew who he was, but they were trying to act normal. Lewis was in Italy for the Formula One race at Monza. He always visited hospitals when he traveled. Not for publicity or photos. He did it because it felt right. Kids who were sick deserved to meet their heroes. "The boy you're visiting is very special," said Dr. Maria Rossi, the head doctor. She was walking next to Lewis, leading him to a room at the end of the hall. "His name is Luca. He's 12 years old." "What's wrong with him?" Lewis asked quietly. Dr. Rossi's face became sad. "Cancer. Very aggressive. We've tried everything, but..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Lewis felt his heart sink. He had visited many sick children over the years. Some got better, some didn't. But it never got easier. "He loves racing more than anything," Dr. Rossi continued. "His room is covered with Formula One posters. Guess who his favorite driver is?" Lewis smiled, despite the sadness. "Let me guess. Max Verstappen?" "No," Dr. Rossi laughed. "You! He talks about you constantly. Lewis this, Lewis that. His poor mother is tired of hearing about you." They stopped outside room 247. Through the window, Lewis could see a small boy lying in bed. The boy was very thin and had no hair because of his medicine, but his eyes were bright and alert. The room was amazing. Every wall was covered with Formula One pictures, cars, drivers, racing tracks from all over the world. But most of the pictures were of Lewis and his Mercedes. "Luca," Dr. Rossi said as they entered the room, "I have a surprise for you." The boy looked up and his eyes went wide. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Then he whispered, "Lewis? Lewis Hamilton? Is it really you?" "It's really me," Lewis said, walking over to the bed. "How are you feeling, buddy?" "I'm okay," Luca said, but his voice was weak. "I can't believe you're here, in my room. This is the best day ever." Lewis sat down in the chair next to Luca's bed. The boy was so excited he was almost shaking. "Tell me about racing," Luca said. "Tell me everything. What's it like to drive 200 miles per hour? Are you scared? Do you ever want to quit?" Lewis laughed. This kid had more energy than most healthy adults. For the next hour, Lewis told Luca stories about racing, about winning his first championship, about scary crashes he had survived, about the friends he had made. Luca listened to every word like Lewis was telling him the secrets of the universe. "I wish I could drive a Formula One car," Luca said dreamily. "Just once. Even if it was just around the hospital parking lot." "Maybe someday you will," Lewis said. But as soon as the words left his mouth, he felt terrible. He knew Luca would never get that chance. Luca must have seen the sadness in Lewis's eyes. The boy was smart, smarter than most adults. "It's okay," Luca said softly. "I know I'm very sick. The doctors think I might die soon." Lewis felt like crying. This brave little boy was comforting him. It should have been the other way around. "But I'm not sad," Luca continued. "Do you know why?" Lewis shook his head. "Because I got to meet you, and because I learned something important about racing." "What did you learn?" Lewis asked. Luca's eyes got very serious. "Racing isn't about being the fastest. It's about having the biggest heart. And you have the biggest heart of any driver." "Why do you say that?" Lewis asked. "Because you're here, with me. You could be anywhere in the world, but you chose to spend time with a sick kid. That's what champions do." Lewis was quiet for a moment. This 12-year-old boy was teaching him something about life. "Luca, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If another driver made a mistake and crashed into me during a race, what do you think I should do?" Luca thought about this very carefully. "Well, first I'd want to make sure you were okay. Then I'd want to make sure the other driver was okay too. And then I'd forgive them," Luca said simply. "Because everyone makes mistakes. Even Formula One drivers, even you." "But what if it was a really bad mistake? What if I got hurt?" Luca shook his head. "It doesn't matter. Forgiving people isn't about how big the mistake was. It's about how big your heart is." Lewis stared at this incredible boy. "You're pretty wise for someone who's only 12. "My mama says sick kids grow up fast," Luca laughed. "We don't have time to waste being angry about things." They talked for another hour. Luca showed Lewis his collection of toy Formula One cars. He had every car Lewis had ever driven. They were arranged perfectly on a shelf next to his bed. "I pretend to race them," Luca explained. "I make the car sounds and everything. The nurses think I'm crazy." "Can we race them together?" Lewis asked. Luca's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? You want to play cars with me?" For the next 30 minutes, Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world champion, played with toy cars like he was 7 years old. He made engine noises and crash sounds. He let Luca win every race. When it was time to leave, Luca became quiet. "Will I ever see you again?" he asked. Lewis felt a lump in his throat. "I don't know, buddy, but I'll never forget you." "Promise me something," Luca said seriously. "Anything. Promise me that if someone ever crashes into you, you'll remember what I said about forgiveness. Promise me you'll be kind to them, even if they make a big mistake." Lewis looked into Luca's brave eyes. This boy was asking him to make a promise about something that might never happen. But Lewis could see how important it was to him. "I promise," Lewis said. "If someone ever crashes into me, I'll remember your words about forgiveness." Luca smiled the biggest smile Lewis had ever seen. "Good. Because that's what real champions do. They forgive quickly and love big." As Lewis was leaving, Dr. Rossi walked him to the elevator. "That was wonderful," she said. "Luca will talk about this visit for months." "How long does he have?" Lewis asked quietly. Dr. Rossi sighed. Maybe 2 months, maybe less. But you gave him something precious today. You gave him joy. Lewis left the hospital with tears in his eyes. He thought about Luca every day after that. 2 months later, Dr. Rossi called with the news Lewis had been dreading. Luca had died peacefully in his sleep. His last words to his mother were about meeting Lewis Hamilton. Lewis cried for hours that day. He had only known Luca for a few hours, but the boy had changed his life forever. At Luca's funeral, Lewis met the boy's family. His mother, Carmen Rossi, was heartbroken but grateful. Luca talked about you every day until he died, she told Lewis. You made his last month so happy. Lewis learned that Luca had a cousin named Marco, who was about the same age. Marco lived in Maranello and loved karting. The family was very close. Luca always said Marco would be a Formula One driver someday, Carmen said. He believed in his cousin so much. After the funeral, Lewis made a decision. He would carry Luca's racing helmet with him to every race. It was a small blue helmet with Luca's name written in white letters. Lewis kept it hidden in his car, where no one could see it. For 5 years, Lewis had kept his promise to a dying boy. He had been kind to other drivers. He had forgiven their mistakes. He had loved big, just like Luca taught him. But Lewis had never been in a situation where he really needed to use Luca's lesson. Until now. Back in the present, Lewis sat in his hotel room in Hungary, holding Luca's small blue helmet. The crash with Marco Petroni had brought back all the memories. Lewis thought about the promise he had made, about forgiving quickly and loving big, about having the biggest heart of any driver. Then Lewis realized something that made his own heart stop beating for a moment. Marco Petroni, from Maranello, about 19 years old. Could it be? Could this be the same Marco that Luca had talked about? His cousin who loved karting? Lewis grabbed his phone and started searching the internet. Marco Petroni family, Maranello, Italy. What he found made him gasp out loud. Marco's full name was Marco Antonio Petroni. His mother was Sofia Petroni, and his father had been Giuseppe Petroni, who was married to Sofia Rossi before she changed her name. Rossi, the same last name as Luca. Lewis's hands were shaking as he kept reading. Giuseppe Petroni had a nephew named Luca Rossi, who died of cancer in 2019. Marco Petroni was Luca's cousin. The boy Lewis had crashed with was the same boy Luca had believed would be a Formula One driver someday. Lewis looked at Luca's helmet and whispered, "You knew, didn't you? You knew I would need to keep my promise for Marco." Everything made sense now. The universe had given Lewis a chance to honor his promise to a dying boy. Marco wasn't just some reckless rookie who had made a mistake. He was Luca's cousin, the boy Luca had loved and believed in. Lewis knew what he had to do. But first, he needed to learn more about Marco. He needed to understand the young man Luca had been so proud of. The hug that would break the internet was getting closer. But it would only happen when Lewis was ready to show the world what Luca had taught him about forgiveness. Lewis couldn't sleep that night. He kept staring at Luca's small blue helmet, thinking about the incredible connection he had discovered. Marco Petroni wasn't just the driver who had crashed into him. He was Luca's cousin, the boy Luca had always believed would make it to Formula One. At 6 a.m., Lewis called his assistant Angela. She had worked with him for years and was used to his strange requests. "Angela, I need you to find out everything you can about Marco Petroni," Lewis said quietly. "The driver who crashed into you?" Angela sounded confused. Louis, why do you want to know about him? Are you planning to sue him or something? No, nothing like that. Just trust me. I need to know about his family, his background, everything. Angela was quiet for a moment. Okay, but this is weird. Everyone expects you to be angry with him. The fans are going crazy waiting for you to say something. I know, Louis said, but I'm not ready to talk yet. Just get me that information, please. 3 hours later, Angela called back with a file full of details about Marco's life. What she had found made Louis's heart ache. His father Giuseppe died when Marco was 12, Angela reported. Car accident, not racing related. After that, his mother Sofia worked nights cleaning offices to pay for Marco's karting. Louis thought about Luca, who had also been 12 when Louis met him. Both boys had faced terrible tragedy at the same age. What about other family? Louis asked. His father had one sister, Carmen Rossi. She had a son named Luca, who died of cancer in 2019. The family was very close before Luca got sick. Louis's hands were shaking. Carmen Rossi was Luca's mother, the woman who had cried at Luca's funeral and told Louis how much his visit had meant to her son. Angela, I need you to find Carmen Rossi's phone number. Can you do that? I think so. But Louis, what's going on? You're acting very strange. Louis took a deep breath. I met Luca Rossi once, in a hospital in Milan. He was a very special boy, and I made him a promise before he died. Angela was quiet. She knew Louis well enough to know when something was really important to him. I'll find her number, she said simply. That afternoon, Louis sat in his hotel room with his phone in his hands. Carmen Rossi's number was written on a piece of paper in front of him. His heart was beating fast. What would he say? Hi, I'm the driver your nephew just crashed into, and I want to talk about your dead son? Louis took a deep breath and dialed the number. Hello? A woman's voice answered in Italian. Mrs. Rossi? Carmen Rossi? Louis said in his careful Italian. Yes. Who is this? This is Lewis Hamilton. I don't know if you remember me, but I visited your son Luca in the hospital 5 years ago. There was a long silence. Then Louis heard Carmen start to cry. Louis! Oh my God! Lewis Hamilton! Of course I remember you. Luca talked about you every day until he died. You were his hero. Mrs. Rossi, I need to ask you something important. Do you know what happened at the Belgian Grand Prix last week? Carmen's crying stopped. You mean the crash? With Marco? My nephew Marco? Yes. I just found out that Marco is Luca's cousin. I had no idea. Carmen was quiet for a long moment. Marco doesn't know you visited Luca. We never told him. After Luca died, Marco was so sad. He blamed himself for not visiting more when Luca was sick. We thought it would be too hard for him to know that his hero had been with Luca. Louis felt tears in his own eyes. Mrs. Rossi, before Luca died, he made me promise something. He made me promise that if another driver ever crashed into me, I would forgive them quickly. He said that's what real champions do. Carmen started crying again. That sounds exactly like something Luca would say. He was always teaching people about kindness, even when he was dying. I want to honor that promise, Louis said, but I need to know more about Marco. Is he really the boy Luca always talked about? The one who was going to be a Formula One driver? Oh yes, Carmen said proudly. Luca loved Marco so much. He would call him every week when he was in the hospital. Marco would tell him about his karting races, and Luca would give him advice. Luca always said Marco had the talent to make it to Formula One. Louis thought about this. how is Marco doing? Now? After the crash, I mean. Carmen's voice became sad. Terrible. He calls his mother Sophia, crying every night. He thinks his Formula One career is over. He thinks everyone hates him. The poor boy is destroying himself with guilt. Does he know about my promise to Luca? No. Like I said, we never told him you visited. We wanted to protect him from more sadness. Louis made a decision. Mrs. Rossi, I want to meet with Marco. I want to tell him about Luca and about the promise I made. But I need your help. What kind of help? I need to understand who Marco really is. Not the driver who made a mistake, but the boy Luca loved. Can you help me with that? Carmen was quiet for a moment. Louis, are you sure about this? The whole world is angry with Marco right now. If you help him, people might be angry with you too. I don't care about that, Louis said firmly. Luca taught me that forgiveness isn't about what other people think. It's about doing what's right in your heart. For the next hour, Carmen told Louis everything about Marco. How he was shy but determined. How he worked harder than anyone else to honor his father's memory. How he still called Luca's mother every month to check on her, even though he was busy with Formula One. Marco is a good boy, Carmen said. He makes mistakes, but his heart is pure. Just like Luca always said. She also told Louis something that broke his heart. After Luca died, Marco had wanted to quit racing. He felt guilty for chasing his dreams when his cousin couldn't chase his anymore. But Luca's mother, Sophia, Marco's aunt, she convinced him to keep racing. She said Luca would be angry if Marco gave up his dream because of sadness. Louis thought about this. Marco was carrying the weight of his dead cousin's dreams. No wonder he was driving so desperately, trying so hard to prove himself. Mrs. Rossi, there's one more thing I need to know. Does Marco still have any of Luca's things? Oh yes. Luca left Marco his collection of toy Formula One cars. Marco keeps them in his apartment in Monaco. He says they remind him to never give up. Louis remembered playing with those same toy cars in Luca's hospital room. The memory made him smile through his tears. Thank you for talking to me, Louis said. Tatitantorn, you've helped me understand so much. Louis, what are you going to do now? Louis looked at Luca's helmet sitting on his hotel room desk. I'm going to keep my promise to your son. I'm going to show Marco the forgiveness that Luca taught me about. After he hung up, Louis sat quietly for a long time. The pieces of the puzzle were all coming together. Marco wasn't just some reckless rookie. He was a young man carrying the dreams of his dead father and his dead cousin. He was trying so hard to honor their memory that he was making desperate mistakes. Louis understood that feeling, the pressure to be perfect, the fear of letting people down, the weight of other people's dreams on your shoulders. But most importantly, Louis understood what Luca would want him to do. The boy who had taught him about forgiveness would want Louis to show kindness to his beloved cousin Marco. Louis picked up his phone and called Angela again. I need you to find out where Marco Petroni is staying in Hungary. And Angela, I need you to arrange a private meeting. Just the two of us. Louis, are you sure about this? The media is going to go crazy. I don't care about the media, Louis said. This isn't about them. This is about keeping a promise to a very special boy. The hug that would break the internet was getting closer. But first, Louis had to do something that would shock Marco even more than it would shock the world. He had to tell Marco the truth about Luca. 3 days before the Hungarian Grand Prix, Marco Petroni sat alone in his Monaco apartment. He hadn't left the building in 2 days. Every time he went outside, photographers followed him. Fans yelled angry words at him. It was easier to stay inside and hide. The apartment was small but nice. Marco's mother, Sophia, had helped him decorate it when he first got to Formula One. One wall was a shelf with his most precious possessions, Luca's collection of toy Formula One cars. Marco was staring at the tiny cars when his doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting anyone. His heart started beating fast. What if it was angry fans? What if they had found where he lived? The doorbell rang again. Marco walked slowly to the door and looked through the peephole. What he saw made him think he was dreaming. Lewis Hamilton was standing in the hallway. Marco's legs felt weak. His hero was here at his apartment. But why? Was Lewis here to yell at him? To tell him he should quit Formula One? Marco's hands were shaking as he opened the door. "Hello, Marco," Lewis said quietly. He was wearing jeans and a simple black t-shirt. No cameras, no bodyguards, just Lewis Hamilton, standing alone in the hallway. "Lewis?" Marco whispered in English. His voice was barely audible. "What? What are you doing here?" "I came to talk to you. May I come in?" Marco nodded, still not believing this was real. He stepped aside and let Lewis into his small apartment. Lewis looked around the room. His eyes stopped on the shelf of toy Formula One cars. A small smile appeared on his face. "Those are beautiful cars," Lewis said. "Where did you get them?" Marco's voice was still shaky. "They belong to my cousin. He died a few years ago." Lewis walked closer to the shelf. He picked up one of the tiny cars, a red Ferrari. "Your cousin had good taste. This is a beautiful collection." "Lewis, why are you here?" Marco asked. He was still standing by the door, afraid to move. "Are you angry with me? Do you want me to apologize again? Because I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Lewis turned to face Marco. "I'm not here because I'm angry." "Then why?" Lewis was quiet for a moment. "What was your cousin's name?" Marco looked, confused. "His name? Why do you want to know?" "Please. It's important." "Luca," Marco said softly. "Luca Rossi. He was 12 when he died." Lewis felt his heart skip a beat. Even though he already knew, hearing Marco say Luca's name made it real. "Marco, I need to show you something. Can you sit down?" Marco sat on his small couch, still looking scared and confused. Lewis sat across from him and pulled out his phone. "Do you remember when you were 15 and we met at that karting event in Monza?" Lewis asked. "Of course. You signed my helmet. It was the best day of my life. Do you remember what I wrote on your helmet?" Marco nodded. "Dream big, race clean, forgive quickly. I still have that helmet. Can you show me?" Marco got up and walked to his bedroom. He came back carrying his old white karting helmet. The words Lewis had written were still visible. "Dream big, race clean, forgive quickly, LH." Lewis took the helmet and held it gently. "Marco, I wrote those words because of someone special. Someone who taught me about forgiveness." "What do you mean?" Lewis looked directly into Marco's eyes. "I wrote those words because of your cousin Luca." Marco's face went white. "What? How do you know about Luca?" "Because I met him, Marco. I spent an afternoon with him in a hospital in Milan in 2019. He was the most incredible boy I've ever known." Marco stared at Lewis like he was speaking a foreign language. "That's impossible. Luca never met you." "He would have told me. He told me everything." Lewis pulled out his phone and showed Marco a photo. It was a picture of Lewis sitting next to a thin boy with no hair, both of them smiling and holding toy Formula One cars. "This is Luca," Lewis said gently. "This photo was taken in his hospital room." Marco looked at the photo and started shaking. "Oh my God! Oh my God! That's really him. That's really Luca." Tears began falling down his face. "But why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't he tell me he met you?" "Your family wanted to protect you. They thought it would make you too sad." Marco was crying harder now. "He talked about you all the time. Every phone call, he would ask me about racing and tell me stories about Lewis Hamilton. He said you were the greatest driver who ever lived." "He was wrong about that," Lewis said. "He was much greater than I'll ever be." "What do you mean?" Lewis sat forward on the couch. "Marco, before Luca died, he made me promise something. He made me promise that if another driver ever crashed into me, I would forgive them quickly. He said that's what real champions do." Marco stopped crying and stared at Lewis. "He made you promise to forgive people?" "Yes." He said, "Forgiveness isn't about how big the mistake is. It's about how big your heart is." Marco put his head in his hands. "I can't believe this. All this time, I thought you hated me. I thought I had ruined everything. Marco, look at me." Marco lifted his head. His eyes were red from crying. "I could never hate you," Lewis said. "Do you know why?" Marco shook his head. "Because Luca loved you so much. He talked about you the whole time I was with him. He said his cousin Marco was going to be a Formula One driver someday. He was so proud of you." "He said that?" "He believed in you more than anyone. He said you had a pure heart and incredible talent. He said you would make it to Formula One because you raced for the right reasons." Marco started crying again, but these were different tears. Not tears of sadness, but tears of joy mixed with grief. "I miss him so much," Marco whispered. "Every race, I think about him. I try to drive like he would want me to, but I keep messing up." "That's because you're trying too hard," Lewis said kindly. "You're carrying the weight of his dreams and your father's dreams. That's too much pressure for anyone." Lewis stood up and walked back to the shelf of toy cars. He picked up a small silver Mercedes, one that looked just like his current Formula One car. "Luca and I played with these cars in his hospital room," Lewis said. "He let me win some races, but he was very competitive." Marco laughed through his tears. "That sounds like Luca. He never let me win at anything." Lewis turned around, still holding the toy Mercedes. "Marco, I have something that belongs to you." "What do you mean?" Lewis pulled a small bag from his jacket. Inside was a tiny blue racing helmet with white letters that spelled Luca. Marco gasped. "Is that Luca's helmet? I've been carrying it to every race for 5 years, but I think it's time it came home." Lewis handed the small helmet to Marco. Marco held it like it was made of glass. "Luca would want you to have this," Lewis said. "He would want you to know that mistakes don't define us. What matters is how we learn from them and how we treat each other." Marco looked up at Lewis with wonder in his eyes. "You're really forgiving me? After everything?" "There's nothing to forgive," Lewis said simply. "Crashes happen in racing. What matters is that we're both okay and that we learn from it." "But I ruined your championship chances. I destroyed your car. Everyone hates me." Lewis sat back down next to Marco. "Do you know what Luca told me about champions?" "What?" he said. "Real champions aren't the ones who never fall down. They're the ones who help others get back up. Marco held Luca's tiny helmet against his chest. I don't understand why you're being so kind to me. Lewis smiled. Because that's what Luca would do. And because I made him a promise. A promise I intend to keep. For the next hour, Lewis told Marco everything about his visit with Luca. About the toy car races, about Luca's wisdom, about how a dying boy had taught a world champion about forgiveness. Marco listened to every word, crying and laughing at the same time. He learned that his cousin had been even more amazing than he remembered. Lewis, Marco said finally, what happens now? The whole world still hates me. Lewis stood up and put his hand on Marco's shoulder. Now we show them what Luca taught us. We show them that forgiveness is stronger than hate. How do we do that? Lewis smiled. You'll see. But first, you need to get ready for Hungary. And Marco? Yes? Drive for yourself this time. Not for your father's memory, not for Luca's dreams. Drive because you love it. That's what they both would want. As Lewis walked to the door, Marco called after him, Lewis, thank you for visiting Luca, for keeping your promise, for everything. Lewis turned back with tears in his eyes. Thank you for being the boy Luca always said you were. After Lewis left, Marco sat alone with Luca's helmet in his hands. For the first time since the crash, he felt hope. His hero didn't hate him. His cousin would be proud of him. The world was about to see something beautiful. Something that would remind everyone why Formula One was about more than just winning races. The hug that would break the internet was only days away. After Lewis left his apartment, Marco sat alone for hours, holding Luca's tiny blue helmet. His mind was spinning with everything he had just learned. His cousin, his best friend, his hero Luca had actually met Lewis Hamilton. They had played together, laughed together, and Luca had taught Lewis about forgiveness. Marco looked at the shelf of toy Formula One cars with new eyes. These weren't just toys anymore. They were memories of a magical afternoon between his cousin and his racing hero. Marco picked up his phone and called his mother, Sophia. "Mama," he said, his voice still shaky from crying. "Did you know that Lewis Hamilton visited Luca in the hospital?" There was a long silence. Then Sophia sighed deeply. "Yes, my son. We knew. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were already so sad when Luca died. We thought it would hurt you more to know that your hero had been with him, and you hadn't." Marco felt more tears coming. "Mama, Lewis came to see me today. He told me everything. He gave me Luca's racing helmet." Sophia started crying on the phone. "Oh, Marco, Luca would be so happy. He always said Lewis Hamilton had the biggest heart of any driver." He was right, Marco whispered. The next morning, Marco woke up feeling different. For the first time since the crash, he didn't feel sick to his stomach. He didn't feel like hiding from the world. Luca's helmet was sitting on his bedside table, and it made him feel brave. Marco decided to do something he hadn't done in weeks. He was going to go outside and face the world. At the Monaco harbor, Marco walked slowly along the water. Photographers started following him, but he didn't run away. When fans recognized him, some still booed, but Marco didn't hide his face. One little boy, maybe 8 years old, was wearing a Lewis Hamilton t-shirt. When he saw Marco, he started to walk away with his father. "Wait," Marco called out in English. He walked over to the boy and knelt down. "What's your name?" "Tommy," the boy said quietly. "Tommy, do you know what Lewis Hamilton taught me yesterday?" The boy shook his head. He taught me that real champions help each other, even when someone makes a mistake. Tommy's father was watching carefully, ready to protect his son if needed. I made a big mistake, Marco continued. I crashed into your hero Lewis, but he forgave me. Do you know why? Why? Tommy asked. Because that's what champions do. They forgive quickly and love big. Tommy thought about this. Are you and Lewis friends now? Marco smiled. I think we might be. Tommy smiled back. Then I forgive you too. The little boy's father was shocked. His son had been angry about the crash for weeks, but now he was smiling at Marco Petroni. Marco signed Tommy's Lewis Hamilton t-shirt and gave him a high five. For the first time in weeks, Marco felt like a real Formula One driver again. That afternoon, Marco called his team boss, Otmar Szafnauer. Otmar, I know you're probably going to fire me after Hungary, Marco said, but I want you to know that I'm not giving up. I'm going to drive the best race of my life. Otmar was surprised. Marco had sounded defeated for weeks. Now he sounded strong and confident. Marco, what's changed? You sound different. I learned something important about forgiveness and about racing for the right reasons. What do you mean? Marco looked at Luca's helmet. I mean, I'm not racing to prove anything to anyone anymore. I'm racing because I love it, because it's what I was born to do. Otmar smiled for the first time since the crash. Now that sounds like a real Formula One driver. The news that Lewis had visited Marco somehow leaked to the media. By Thursday morning, every sports website in the world was talking about it. Lewis Hamilton visits Marco Petroni, screamed the headlines. What did they talk about? Is Hamilton planning to forgive the rookie? The paddock at the Hungarian Grand Prix was buzzing with excitement. No one could talk about anything else. Journalists from around the world were trying to get interviews with both drivers, but Lewis and Marco weren't talking to the media. They had something more important to do. On Friday morning, Lewis found Marco in the Alpine garage. Marco was sitting quietly, preparing for practice. Luca's tiny helmet was in his hands. How are you feeling? Lewis asked. Better, Marco said honestly. Still nervous, but better. Good. I have something else for you. Lewis pulled out another small bag. Inside was a bracelet made of black beads with a small silver car charm. This belonged to Luca too, Lewis said. His mother Carmen gave it to me after the funeral. She said Luca wore it to every karting race for good luck. Marco took the bracelet, with shaking hands. But Lewis, this is too much. You've already given me so much. Luca would want you to have it, especially for your first race since learning the truth. Marco put the bracelet on his wrist. It fit perfectly. Lewis, can I ask you something? Anything. What did Luca say about me? I mean, really say? Lewis sat down next to Marco. He said you were the bravest person he knew. He said you kept racing, even after your father died, and that took incredible courage. Marco felt tears coming again. He also said you called him every week when he was sick. You would tell him about your races and make him laugh. Carmen told me that you were the only person who could make Luca smile during his worst days. I loved him so much, Marco whispered. And he loved you. He said his cousin Marco had a pure heart and would never give up on his dreams. He was right. That afternoon, during practice, Marco drove differently. Not desperately, like he had been doing for months, not trying to prove anything to anyone. He drove with joy, like he used to when he was a kid. His lap times were faster than they had been all season. His teammate, Pierre Gasly, was amazed. Marco, "What happened to you?" Pierre asked. "You're driving like a completely different person." "I remembered why I started racing," Marco said simply. The other drivers in the paddock noticed the change too. Marco was smiling again. He was talking to people instead of hiding in his garage. Most importantly, he was driving with confidence. On Saturday, during qualifying, Marco achieved something magical. For the first time in his Formula One career, he qualified in the top 10, 8th place. Good enough to score points on Sunday. When Marco got out of his car, the Alpine team was cheering. Even the mechanics who had been frustrated with him were celebrating. Marco looked around the paddock and saw Lewis watching from the Mercedes garage. Lewis gave him a big thumbs up and a huge smile. That night, Marco called his mother again. "Mama, I qualified 8th. "Oh, my son, I'm so proud of you. Your papa would be dancing with joy. And Mama? Luca would be proud too." Sophia started crying happy tears. "Yes, my boy. Luca would be so proud." Sunday morning arrived with perfect weather. The Hungarian Grand Prix was about to begin, and Marco felt ready, not just to race, but to show the world what Luca had taught him about courage and forgiveness. He put on Luca's bracelet and placed the tiny blue helmet in his cockpit, where he could see it during the race. "This one's for you, cousin," Marco whispered. In the Mercedes garage, Lewis was preparing for his own race. He had his own good luck charm, a small photo of Luca that he kept in his helmet. The two drivers were about to show the world something beautiful. They were about to prove that racing was about more than winning and losing. It was about respect, forgiveness, and the bonds that connect all competitors. The hug that would break the internet was just hours away. But first, they had to race. The 8th Hungarian Grand Prix morning was perfect for racing. The sun was shining over the Hungaroring circuit, and thousands of fans filled the grandstands. But all eyes were on two drivers, Lewis Hamilton and Marco Petroni. In the media center, journalists from around the world were asking the same questions. Will Hamilton and Petroni talk to each other? Is Hamilton really going to forgive the rookie? What will happen when they meet on track? But neither driver was giving interviews. They had more important things to focus on. In the Alpine garage, Marco sat quietly in his racing car. Luca's tiny, blue helmet was tucked safely in the cockpit next to his feet. Luca's bracelet was around his wrist, hidden under his racing gloves. For the first time in months, Marco felt calm. His engineer came over the radio. "Marco, how are you feeling today?" "Ready," Marco said simply, and he meant it. 3 garages away, Lewis was doing his own pre-race routine. He always carried a small photo of Luca in his helmet, but today felt special. Today, he was racing not just for himself, but to honor a promise made to a dying boy. As the drivers walked to their cars for the formation lap, cameras followed every step. The crowd was buzzing with excitement. Signs in the grandstands read everything from "Forgive and forget" to "Racing is about respect." During the formation lap, something beautiful happened. As Lewis passed the Alpine garage in his Mercedes, Marco was just leaving his garage. Their eyes met across the pit lane. Lewis raised his hand and gave Marco a small wave. Marco waved back, a genuine smile on his face. The photographers went crazy. That tiny moment of connection was already being shared on social media around the world. "Did you see that?" the TV commentator said excitedly. "Hamilton just waved at Petroni. The healing process has begun." The race started with incredible drama. From 8th place, Marco had the drive of his life. He was calm, calculated, and brilliant. No desperate moves, no risky overtakes. just pure, beautiful racing. By lap 10, Marco had moved up to 6th place. The crowd was starting to cheer for him. Even some of the fans who had booed him were impressed by his smooth driving. Lewis was running in 4th place, fighting his way toward the front, but he kept checking his mirrors to see how Marco was doing. Every time Marco made a good move, Lewis found himself smiling inside his helmet. On lap 25, Marco made his pit stop. The Alpine mechanics worked perfectly, and Marco came out in 7th place, right behind Pierre Gasly, his own teammate. "Great job, Marco," his race engineer said over the radio. "You're driving like a champion today." Marco felt tears of joy in his eyes. For months, his team had been frustrated with him. Now, they were proud of him again. But the real test came on lap 32, the same lap number where Marco had crashed into Lewis at Spa 3 weeks earlier. Marco was approaching a group of slower cars. In the old days, he might have tried a desperate move to pass them all at once. But not today. Today, he waited for the right moment. Lewis, running just ahead of the group, saw what was happening in his mirrors. He watched Marco patiently follow the slower cars, waiting for a safe opportunity to pass. "That's it, Marco," Lewis whispered to himself. "That's how a real driver does it." When Marco finally made his move, it was perfect. Clean, safe, and brilliant. He passed 2 cars in one smooth motion and moved into 5th place. The crowd erupted. Even the TV commentators were amazed. "Marco Petroni is driving like a completely different person today," they said. This is the performance his team has been waiting for all season. With 10 laps to go, Marco was running in 5th place, his best position ever in Formula One. But more importantly, he was driving with the joy and respect that Luca had always believed in. Lewis was now in 3rd place, having a great race of his own. But he was prouder of Marco's performance than his own result. On the final lap, both drivers crossed the finish line within seconds of each other. Lewis in 3rd place, Marco in 5th place, his first Formula One points. As they completed their cool-down lap, Lewis pulled alongside Marco's Alpine. Through their helmets, they looked at each other and both raised their hands in celebration. The crowd went wild. 2 drivers who had crashed 3 weeks ago were now celebrating together like old friends. In the Alpine garage, the mechanics were jumping up and down. Marco's mother, Sofia, was watching on TV in Italy, crying tears of joy. Carmen Rossi, Luca's mother, was crying too, knowing that her son's spirit had helped make this moment possible. When Marco climbed out of his car, his team surrounded him with hugs. His race engineer had tears in his eyes. "Marco, that was incredible," Otmar Schaffnauer said, patting him on the back. "You drove like a veteran today." Marco looked around at all the happy faces. For the first time since joining Formula One, he felt like he truly belonged. But the best moment was still to come. As Marco was celebrating with his team, he saw Lewis walking across the pit lane. Lewis had finished his own interviews and was heading straight for the Alpine garage. The cameras noticed immediately. Photographers and cameramen started running to get the perfect angle. The crowd in the grandstands began standing up to see what would happen. Social media started exploding with notifications. Everyone around the world was watching the same thing. Lewis Hamilton walking toward Marco Petroni. Marco saw Lewis coming and started walking toward him. The noise in the paddock began to fade as everyone realized they were about to witness something special. They met in the middle of the pit lane, surrounded by hundreds of people, but somehow alone in their own world. Cameras clicked furiously. The crowd held its breath. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Two drivers who had been through so much together without even knowing it. Two young men connected by the memory of a brave boy who had taught them both about forgiveness. Lewis spoke first, but his words were too quiet for the cameras to hear. He was saying something private, something meant only for Marco. Marco nodded and said something back, also too quiet for anyone else to hear. Then, without any hesitation, Lewis opened his arms. The hug lasted almost 30 seconds. Both men had tears in their eyes. The crowd erupted in the loudest cheer of the day. Photographers captured the moment from every angle. Within minutes, the image was trending on every social media platform in the world. Forgiveness. First was the top hashtag globally. News channels interrupted their regular programming to show the video. Even people who didn't follow racing were moved by the powerful image of two competitors embracing after adversity. But the most beautiful part wasn't visible in any photo or video. It was what Lewis whispered in Marco's ear during that famous hug, and what Marco whispered back. Those words were meant for them alone. Words that would complete the promise Lewis had made to a dying boy 5 years earlier. The hug that broke. The internet was finally happening. And it was more beautiful than anyone could have imagined. The photo was perfect. Two racing drivers embracing in the middle of the Hungarian Grand Prix paddock, surrounded by hundreds of people, but lost in their own moment of connection. Lewis Hamilton's arms wrapped around Marco Petroni, both men with tears streaming down their faces. Within 60 seconds of the hug ending, the photo was already going viral. The first person to post it was a photographer from Sky Sports. His caption was simple: "This is why we love racing." Then came the flood. ESPN shared it with the caption, "Forgiveness. Lewis Hamilton embraces Marco Petroni after Hungarian GP." Formula One's official account posted, "When sport brings out the best in humanity. Forgiveness first." But it wasn't just sports media. News channels around the world picked up the story. Regular people who had never watched a Formula 1 race were sharing the image because it represented something bigger than racing. CNN ran the story with the headline, "The hug that reminded the world about forgiveness." BBC News called it a masterclass in sportsmanship. Even celebrities who had nothing to do with racing were posting about it. Actors, musicians, politicians, and athletes from other sports all shared the image with messages about kindness and second chances. Back in the paddock, Lewis and Marco were still standing together, unaware that their private moment had just become the most viewed sports image of the year. "Thank you," Marco whispered as they finally stepped apart. "Thank you for keeping your promise to him," Lewis replied quietly. Around them, the crowd was still cheering. Photographers were still taking pictures, but Lewis and Marco only had eyes for each other. A Sky Sports reporter managed to get close enough to ask a question. "Lewis, can you tell us what this moment means to you?" Lewis looked at the reporter, then at Marco, then back at the camera. "This moment means that racing is about more than winning and losing. It's about respect, forgiveness, and remembering that we're all human beings who make mistakes." "And Marco," the reporter turned to the young Italian, "how does it feel to receive this forgiveness from Lewis?" Marco's voice was shaky with emotion. "It feels like a gift I don't deserve, but Lewis has taught me that forgiveness isn't about deserving it. It's about choosing to give it." The reporter tried to ask more questions, but Lewis and Marco walked away together. They had said everything they needed to say. Meanwhile, around the world, the internet was exploding. Twitter crashed twice in the first hour as millions of people tried to share and comment on the photo. The hashtag #forgiveness. First was used over 5 million times in the first 24 hours. Instagram was flooded with reposts of the image. TikTok videos about the hug were getting millions of views. YouTube was full of reaction videos from people crying as they watched the moment. The comments were incredible. "This made me cry, happy tears. This is what sport should be about. I don't even watch F1, but this is beautiful. We need more of this in the world." My kids were fighting earlier. I showed them this video, and now they're hugging. Thank you, Lewis and Marco. Faith in humanity, restored. This is why forgiveness is so powerful. But the most touching responses came from people who had been directly affected by the message. A teacher in London posted, "I showed this to my class today. We had a long discussion about forgiveness and second chances. Several students apologized to classmates they had been fighting with." A mother in Australia wrote, "My teenage son has been angry with his father for months. After seeing this, he called his dad and they talked for 2 hours." Sometimes it takes strangers to show us how to love our own family. A cancer survivor in Brazil shared, "I've been bitter about my illness for years. Watching these two men choose love over hate has inspired me to forgive life for what it took from me and focus on what it gave me instead." The hug was changing lives around the world. In Italy, Marco's hometown of Maranello was celebrating like they had won the World Cup. People were dancing in the streets, honking car horns and singing. The local newspaper printed a special edition with the hug photo on the front page and the headline, "Our boy comes home." Marco's mother, Sofia, was at the local cafe, surrounded by neighbors who were buying her coffee and sharing in her joy. "We always knew Marco was special," said Mrs. Benedetti, who had lived next door to the Petroni family for 30 years. "But today, the whole world knows it too." In England, Lewis's father, Anthony, was at home watching the news coverage with tears in his eyes. "That's my boy," he said to himself. "That's the son I raised." He called Lewis immediately. "I'm so proud of you," Anthony said when Lewis answered. "Not for the race, but for that hug. That's the most important thing you've ever done." The racing world was in shock. Other Formula One drivers were posting their own messages of support. Max Verstappen tweeted, "This is what makes our sport beautiful. Respect to both Lewis and Marco." Charles Leclerc posted on Instagram, "Two champions showing us what really matters. Proud to share the track with both of you." Even team bosses were emotional. Toto Wolff, Lewis's team principal at Mercedes, gave an interview saying, "In 30 years of racing, I have never seen anything more powerful than that hug." Lewis has reminded us all why we fell in love with this sport. But perhaps the most important reaction came from children around the world. Schools started using the hug as a teaching tool about forgiveness and conflict resolution. Children who had been bullying others apologized. Kids who had been holding grudges learned to let them go. An elementary school teacher in Japan posted a video of her students recreating the hug after resolving their own classroom disputes. The video got 10 million views. By the end of the day, the original photo had been seen by an estimated 500 million people worldwide. It was the most shared sports image in social media history. News programs that normally focused on politics and world problems led their broadcasts with the story of two racing drivers choosing love over hate. The Vatican issued a statement praising the display of forgiveness. The Dalai Lama shared the photo with a message about compassion. World leaders from different countries posted about the power of reconciliation. But in all the global celebration, the most important detail was still unknown. What had Lewis and Marco actually said to each other during that famous 30-second embrace? The cameras had captured every angle of the hug, but the audio was lost in the noise of the crowd. Lip readers tried to analyze the footage, but the men had spoken too quietly, and their faces were too close together. Only Louis and Marco knew the words that had completed a promise made to a dying boy 5 years earlier. Those words would remain, their secret for now. But soon, the world would learn the final piece of this incredible story. The hug had broken the internet. Now it was time to reveal the truth that made it all possible. 1 week after the Hungarian Grand Prix, the world was still talking about the hug. But Lewis Hamilton and Marco Petroni had stayed quiet about what they said to each other during that famous moment. Every journalist in the world wanted to know. TV shows offered millions of dollars for an exclusive interview. Social media was full of people guessing what the secret words might have been. But Louis and Marco had decided to tell their story together, in their own way. They chose to meet at the one place that had started it all, the Children's Hospital in Milan, where Louis had first met Luca Rossi. Dr. Maria Rossi, who still worked at the hospital, was amazed when Louis called her. "You want to come back? After all these years?" "Yes," Louis said. "And I want to bring someone special with me, Luca's cousin, Marco." On a quiet Tuesday morning, Louis and Marco walked through the same white hallways where Louis had met Luca 5 years earlier. But this time, they weren't alone. A small camera crew followed them, filming for a documentary that would tell the real story behind the hug. They stopped outside room 247, Luca's old room. It looked different now, with new decorations and a different patient. But the memories were still there. "This is where it all began," Louis said quietly to the camera. "This is where a 12-year-old boy taught me the most important lesson of my life." Marco stood next to him, holding Luca's tiny blue helmet. "And this is where my cousin became a hero to the greatest driver in the world." Dr. Rossi joined them in the hallway. "Luca would be so proud of both of you. He always said that racing was about bringing people together, not tearing them apart." They sat down in a quiet room where sick children came to play. Toys and books were scattered around, just like in Luca's room all those years ago. The interviewer, a kind woman named Sarah who worked for the BBC, asked the question everyone wanted answered. "Louis, Marco, the whole world wants to know. What did you say to each other during that hug?" Louis and Marco looked at each other and smiled. "We think it's time to tell them," Louis said. Marco nodded. Luca would want people to know. Louis took a deep breath and began. "When I hugged Marco, I whispered, 'Luca is proud of you. Keep racing for him.'" Marco's eyes filled with tears, just like they had that day in Hungary. And I said back to him, "Thank you for keeping your promise to him." Sarah leaned forward. "What promise?" "Before Luca died," Louis explained, "he made me promise that if another driver ever crashed into me, I would forgive them quickly. He said that's what real champions do." "But there's more to the story," Marco added. "I didn't know Louis had ever met Luca until 3 days before Hungary. My family kept it secret to protect me from more sadness." For the next hour, Louis and Marco told the complete story about Giuseppe Petroni's dreams, about Sofia's sacrifices, about Luca's wisdom, about the toy Formula One cars, about the promise, about the discovery that changed everything. Sarah was crying by the end. So were the camera operators, even the hospital. Staff who had gathered to listen were wiping their eyes. "So the hug wasn't just about forgiving a racing mistake," Sarah said. "It was about honoring a dying boy's wish." "Exactly," Louis said. "Luca taught me that forgiveness isn't about the person who made the mistake. It's about the person who chooses to forgive. It's about having a big enough heart to see past the mistake to the human being underneath. Marco spoke up. And Lewis taught me that carrying anger and guilt doesn't honor the people we love. Racing with joy and kindness does. What happens now? Sarah asked. Lewis smiled. Now we do what Luca always wanted. We help other children who are facing difficult times. Marco pulled out a piece of paper. We're starting the Luca Rossi Foundation. It will help sick children experience racing and meet their heroes. Every child who is fighting a serious illness should get to feel the magic that Luca felt, Lewis added. They should know that even in their darkest moments, there are people who care about them. Dr. Rossi clapped her hands together. Luca would love this. He always said that racing could heal broken hearts. They walked to the children's ward, where current patients were waiting to meet them. The kids had no idea about the famous hug or the viral photo. They just knew that Lewis Hamilton and Marco Petroni had come to visit them. For 2 hours, Lewis and Marco played with the children, signed autographs, and listened to their stories, just like Lewis had done with Luca 5 years earlier. One little girl named Emma, who was 7 years old and fighting cancer, asked Marco a question that made everyone stop and listen. Are you and Lewis best friends now? Marco looked at Lewis and smiled. Yes, I think we are. How did you become best friends? Emma asked. We learned that making mistakes doesn't make you a bad person, Lewis answered. And we learned that forgiving people doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong. Emma thought about this carefully. My brother broke my favorite toy last week. I'm still mad at him. What do you think Luca would tell you to do? Marco asked. Gently, Emma smiled. He would tell me to forgive my brother and give him a hug. That's exactly what he would say, Lewis agreed. When the documentary aired 2 weeks later, it broke viewing records around the world. People who had seen the famous hug finally understood what had made it possible. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in for the Luca Rossi Foundation. Children's hospitals around the world asked Lewis and Marco to visit. Racing drivers from every series volunteered to help. But the most beautiful responses came from ordinary people who had been inspired to forgive others in their own lives. A father in Germany wrote, I hadn't spoken to my son in 3 years because of an argument. After watching your documentary, I called him. We're having dinner next week. A teacher in Brazil posted, 2 students in my class had been enemies all year. After we watched your story together, they apologized to each other and are now best friends. A woman in Canada shared, I've been angry at my sister for 10 years. Your story reminded me that life is too short for grudges. We talked for 4 hours yesterday and cried happy tears. 6 months later, Lewis won his 8th World Championship. Marco finished his rookie season with 3 top 10 finishes and was signed for another year with Alpine. But more importantly, the Luca Rossi Foundation had helped over 1,000 sick children meet their racing heroes. Hospital visits became a regular part of the Formula One calendar. Every race weekend, Lewis carried Luca's tiny helmet with him. Marco wore Luca's bracelet under his gloves. And whenever young drivers made mistakes on track, both Lewis and Marco were the first to offer encouragement instead of criticism. The final scene of the documentary showed Lewis and Marco standing together in Luca's old hospital room, now dedicated as the Luca Rossi Room of Hope. Thank you, Luca, Lewis said to the camera, for teaching us that the biggest victories in life have nothing to do with crossing the finish line first. Marco added, and for showing us that love is always stronger than hate, and forgiveness is always stronger than revenge. As they walked out of the hospital together, the camera captured one last image. Two racing drivers who had become brothers, united by the memory of a brave boy who had taught them both what it really means to be a champion. The hug that broke the internet had become something much bigger. It had become a movement about the power of forgiveness, the importance of second chances, and the truth that every human being deserves kindness. And it all started with a 12-year-old boy who believed that real champions help each other get back up. Luca Rossi's dream had come true. Racing had brought people together. Love had won over hate, and the world was a little bit better because of it. We'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment and tell us your city or country. It's amazing to think that Luca's message of kindness is reaching people all around the globe, just like that famous hug did. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more inspiring stories like this one. We share tales of courage, forgiveness, and the incredible moments that remind us what really matters in life. And here's the most important part. Share this video with your friends and family. In a world that often focuses on conflict and division, stories like Lewis and Marco's remind us that kindness is contagious, forgiveness is powerful, and love always wins in the end. Let's spread Luca's message together, because sometimes all it takes is one story to change someone's day, or maybe even their life. Thanks for listening, and remember, forgive quickly, love big, and keep racing toward your dreams.